My ultimate goal was always to go downwind. I mean, since I was a kid, that was always fulfilling Joachim Kuettner's dream was always kind of a dream of mine.
In December 2025, just before Christmas, we woke up to this flight, which is pretty much a blueprint of what Joe Kuettner had proposed.
We had zero moonlight at all, so it was pitch black outside. I mean, pitch black. If we needed to park in this wave for hours, I was willing to do that because I wanted to get across the Rockies. Trump could build a mountain in the middle of Kansas, 5,000 feet up and about 20 kilometers long,
It's Thursday, it's 8:30 p.m. and we are back on air with Late Night Soaring. Good evening, everybody, and a Happy New Year 2026. We stopped Late Night Soaring, I think it's 2 years ago with irregular sessions, but we always said if there are some spectacular flights, we will be back again on the air. And now we are back with a real special flight, which happens shortly before Christmas 2025, and we are very happy to welcome the great pilot Gordon Boettger. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Matthias and Benny. Frohe neues Jahr, and thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and of course we would like to introduce, everybody knows, Benny Bachmeier.
Yes, hello and good evening from my side as well.
First of all, Benny don't know what happens now. I will show you something. I'll show this one.
Great book.
I would like to make some advertise for the new book of Benny Bachmeier, Peak Soaring. And I think it's an absolute must for everybody like to fly in mountainous terrain or will improve the flying in mountainous terrain. Benny, where can everybody buy it?
Yeah, so thanks for pointing that out, first of all. I'm really proud. It's been more than 1 year of work. I wrote down everything I know about mountain soaring, especially in the European Alps, but it also concerns, of course, a lot of New Zealand and the Rocky Mountains and Morocco and everywhere. People have flown, which I have talked to, and I've flown also personally. Yeah, there is an English version available as well. It's been translated by Clemens Sapek from Boulder, Colorado. And yeah, he and I were in contact a lot over the summer, and he made a really good translation of the book in parallel to me writing it. So it was a very close collaboration, which was a lot of fun and also a lot of work for both of us. So the German version and also the English version in Europe, you can buy directly from the VN2 store or from Amazon if you want, or from anywhere else where you can get gliding equipment and gliding books. In the United States, you can buy it from Cumulus Soaring, there's the English version available, of course, also outside of Europe. And yeah, I put pretty much everything in about thermal soaring, ridge soaring, wave soaring, gliding strategy in the mountains, cross-country techniques, safety, equipment, pretty much everything that we need to know. And also a lot of excitement and motivation by examples and stories and pictures and everything. And actually, both small contributions from Gordon and Matthias are also in the book. So yeah.
Thank you for the book. Beautiful book. I mean,
yeah, definitely. It's the first book flying in the Alps since Jochen Kalkreuth, and that was about 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, but now let's go to this fabulous flight. And the idea is pretty old, I think, Benny.
The idea is very old, and therefore the very first thing that we should take a look at today is actually this person. It's Joe Kuettner. It's actually a German scientist, meteorologist, and engineer who migrated to the United States. He worked on the Apollo program, for example. He died only a couple of years ago at the age of, I think, 103 or so. And he was the pioneer of some aspects of wave soaring internationally and especially in the United States. Joe Kuettner proposed a very interesting idea about doing very long cross-country flights in wave long before they have been done in real life. What Joe Kuettner first realized is that you can wave soar not only along waves, which are maybe a few hundred kilometers long, like the famous Sierra Nevada wave. We can draw maybe the lines in here. This is where also Gordon and Bruce have done the 3,000-kilometer flight, for example. Joe Kuettner realized that flying downwind from wave to wave along where mountains continue towards the downwind direction, you can actually cross a lot of distance. And in the 50s, he flew a 600-kilometer flight from California to Arizona. And this inspired him to actually propose a method of flying a 2,000-kilometer cross-country flight, which was something completely unheard of at the time, like in any aspect. And what he proposed is to actually start in the Minden or Reno area in the Sierra Nevada, and then go downwind pretty much towards and over the Rocky Mountains, and then actually do a downwind glide at the end towards either Kansas City or towards Tulsa. Pretty much in the center of the North American continent, which would be a 2,000-kilometer downwind dash. So Joe Kuettner was very fascinated by this idea of doing such a flight. And so in the 80s, he actually assigned a prize to the first person who would actually do such a 2,000-kilometer straight line one-way flight in a glider. Actually, for completeness, the actual Kuettner flight was done in 2003 by Klaus Ullmann, but in a completely different concept. What he did is he flew south to north along the Andes in Argentina, from El Calafate to San Juan, which was, of course, a crosswind flight and not a downwind flight, because there's just not enough land area and not enough mountains in the downwind direction. So he couldn't utilize the tailwind at all, and he had to use the wave lines along the mountains in the crosswind. But he managed a 2,000-kilometer flight. He won the prize. He also wrote interesting reports about it. You can read it online. And then, just for completeness, a few years later, in 2010, Klaus Ullmann actually beat his own record by flying almost 2,500 kilometers in a straight line in a very similar concept. But going back to the idea which Kuettner originally proposed, you can see here the kind of landmass of the Western United States. And only a few weeks ago, which actually started in Minden, Nevada, and went to the center of the United States, crossing pretty much exactly the half continent of the North Americas. So very fascinating. And of course, this is a reason to come together and talk to the man in question, which is Gordon Boettger. And Gordon, it is a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Benny and Matthias. It's an honor to have the privilege to speak with you folks and share the story of a 40-year-old dream that did come true for me back on December 19th, just 3 weeks ago or so. So, this all started many years ago, and I did have a chance to meet Joachim Kuettner at some of the soaring conventions, and he was a true inspiration, kind of a hero of mine, along with some of the other pioneers that started the wave stuff. And his idea and his article that you had shown was actually something I had read probably hundreds of times. I mean, I carried the article around with me and read it over and over and over, and just dreamed of doing a flight like this. And finally, it came true. And I just want to thank Joachim Kuettner and everyone that supported me throughout the years for all the support and helping my dream come true.
Maybe I can add something information. After the flight of Klaus Ullmann, there was another Kuettner prize introduced for, I think it was 2004, for a straight flight with 2,500 Ks. And as far as I know, it's not done. till now?
No, I don't believe it has been done. I think without a doubt, a 2,000 kilometer straight out is very doable from here, from the Minden area. It's very doable in the States. 2,500 kilometers has to be kind of reevaluated, studied a bit because, as everyone knows, we kind of run out of mountains here east of the Rockies. So, I mean, good example. If we would have had a just one mountain range in Kansas that was, maybe went up 2,000 meters for, 20 kilometers, I think I easily could have gotten that 2,000 kilometer flight. So, um, anyway, that's a whole other thing I think that we can talk about. But I think a 2,000 kilometers straight out from the Minden area is very, very easily doable. And I think Klaus Oman's straight out distance record is within reach too, using two different methods that I have in mind. So we can talk about that here in a bit.
We talk about that later, definitely. Maybe let's go to the other end of the story. You already mentioned that this is a dream of yours, which is quite old, and you have picked up on Kuettner's idea very early and also done some pioneering work in your Kestrel long before you got access to the Arcos jet. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So when I moved up to the Minden area about 20 years ago, 23 years ago, I had a Kestrel 17. That's all I had to work with at the time, and so I made the most of it. I had some big oxygen bottles in there, and being a single place, it was a one-man show. But I did manage to do some straight out distance flights. So I think my furthest one ended up in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, which is, I don't know, somewhere over 1,000 kilometers. But and then I followed up those flights with several downwind flights in the duodiscus. So my furthest downwind flight there was to Hewlett, Wyoming, just west of the Black Hills of South Dakota. And then I also made a flight to Gunnison, Colorado, on a straight out with. Keep in mind these flights prior to the Arcus, like in the Kestrel and in the duodiscus, those are done before we had the luxury of SkySight and all the software and technological advances we have with instrumentation now. So it was a whole different ball game. But we can talk about here in a bit too. I'd like to talk about SkySight a bit and how wonderful it was on this flight and how advantageous it was and how it helped me.
And then, of course, you got the Arcus, which opened up a whole new series of possibilities to you, especially with the night flying capabilities. We talked about them in the previous episode in which you talked about your 3,000 kilometer flight. And yeah, so after beating all the long distance records, yo-yoing along the Sierra Nevada, I guess you needed something new to look forward to.
Well, that's exactly it. I think
New goal.
yeah, my ultimate goal was always to go downwind. I mean, since I was a kid, that was always fulfilling Joachim Kuettner's dream was always kind of a dream of mine, and that was my ultimate dream. The problem is we don't have very many days that allow me to do that, and that's why you've seen this yo-yoing stuff that I think people may be getting tired of seeing with me doing. But that's with the given weather, that's all I was able to pretty much do. So. I mean, the yo-yo flights are still pretty amazing and fun and very good practice for high altitude and dealing with the elements that we're dealing with mountain wave. But the downwind thing has always been a dream of mine. And so about a week before the flight, I did notice. We had a pretty interesting weather pattern show up. It's very rare. What we call it a zonal flow pattern, where the jet stream is basically running west to east, basically a 270 type flow from the Sierra all the way east of the Rockies. And that's a very rare pattern, and typically we'll see that 1 or 2 days a year, if that. And so my availability with my airline schedule has to coincide with that, and a lot of times that doesn't. So luckily I had the whole month of December off, and so I saw that about a week out. I saw this zonal flow pattern set up, and so so I kind of started focusing, kind of getting my mind ready for a possibility of this happening. And what happens a lot is that zonal flow pattern, um, it falls apart pretty quickly. So I didn't have high hopes, but when we got about 5 days from the flight, December 12th, it continued to show a zonal flow pattern. And that's when I got an email from Walt Rogers, who's a retired meteorologist and also sailplane pilot. And he's been soaring for many, many years. I actually got an email from him alerting me of this zonal flow pattern that we like to see for downwind attempts. And once I got that email from him, it kind of confirmed to me that, we really need to start keeping an eye on it. So I started mentally gearing up for this flight, probably 5 days out, and then 4 days out, I started getting the equipment ready. I mean, the amount of workload is incredible because I'm doing 100% of the work. I'm doing the flight planning. I'm doing the weather. I'm doing, the equipment, getting the glider ready, the equipment, and calling air traffic control. And so the workload is extremely high. And then trying to find out the best time, the optimal time to take off. And one luxury I have with SkySight is I have an agreement with Matthew Scudder that when a flight comes along that may end up somewhere in between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., which is not too common for glider pilots, he'll actually run the models for the entire night for me so I can actually see what's going on with the wave during the evening hours, because obviously I'm not limited now with daylight hours because of the night vision goggles, and the glider's fully legal for night flight. So that's definitely a luxury we have in the United States that I'm very appreciative of. And then I also have the letter of agreements with air traffic control. So I've got an LOA, that's what we call a letter of agreement. I have an LOA with Oakland Center, Salt Lake Center, Denver Center, and at this point, I don't have an LOA with Kansas City Center because I never thought I'd get that far, but I did this time. So I'm going to have to expand my LOA further east into the Kansas Center, but they were super helpful. So yeah, what happened is that I started really focusing on the SkySight every day, multiple times a day, to see how things were going to start lining up. And I can show you here on the most viewers don't have the luxury of seeing the SkySight stuff in the evening, but so this is on Friday, December 19th at 3 in the morning, and I can so Minden Airport is can you see the Minden Airport there with the name? That's kind of what I was looking at, and then the entire route of the flight, it takes a pretty big chunk of the map here, but you can see the wave along in the Sierra, then you can see some wave across Utah, and then obviously the Rockies, which is going to be over here, and then nothing downwind, obviously, because there's no terrain to generate the wave. So that was kind of the overall big picture I was looking at. And what I did notice was that there were going to be some difficult areas because the wave was not firm, was not strong across the entire route of the flight. So I knew that there were certain segments of this flight that would be very difficult, that required a lot of patience. And I must say that SkySight was extremely accurate, very, very accurate. And I mean, I've got some videos that I took with the iPhone to show the accuracy of the SkySight that whole day. So the biggest problem with that flight that I figured would be those soft spots basically between the Sierra and the Rockies. The Rockies and the Sangre de Cristo Mountains I knew would generate very, very strong wave, which they did. Unfortunately, when my start out of here was not as expected. I thought it was going to be a lot stronger than it was, and it ended up being a little slow getting out of here, so to speak. I mean, not by German standards, but by Sierra standards, Sierra Mountain wave standards, it was pretty weak. But
what does it mean, weak? What was the climb rate on average?
Well, the average, I think out of here, I started off with like 3 knots. What is that in 3 meters? That's 1.5 meters per second or so.
Okay, yeah.
So it wasn't, I mean, usually the the wave over Minden, you're doing it could, it's 10 meters per second. Um, so um so what happened is, if we can back this up like 3 days out, I really got heavily. I mean, I was at the airport all day long, talking to air traffic control and talking to several other people about a proposed route to fly. And as we can see there in the Minden, Benny showing the Minden airport. Um, uh, so if we back this up a day, I had the equipment, everything completely ready, a full day before the flight. And then one day prior, I call all the air traffic control centers. I talk to the supervisors and tell them what's going on with my letter of agreement and get them on board with everything. Then I have to file a flight plan. So what I did with my flight plan is I filed a flight plan basically with multiple points on that flight plan, and that included, and I'll just show you right here. Um, there were basically essentially multiple waypoints here, and that was my IFR flight plan that I filed with ATC. They don't quite understand what's going on because they expect one fix to another, or you know basically a straight line. So I had to explain all that to them, and obviously I'm making multiple deviations during the day, as I'm staying connected to the wave. So um, the day before, I called Bruce about 3 days before the flight, and I said, "Hey, are you around? There's a big day that's coming up for a downwind attempt." And Bruce had intended to go off to the East Coast for holiday. And I said, "Well, if you want to do this downwind flight, I'm going to do it on the 19th." And so he made himself available. So we both got, he was ready, I was ready. I didn't sleep at all that night. Your mind's going. And a big thing that I was concerned about was the takeoff time, because this wave was basically this zonal flow pattern was going to run for easily a 24-hour period. So do I take off? It looked like I could take off anywhere from like midnight to 6 in the morning or something. So I was trying to find the optimal window to take off. And so what I have to do there is go, okay, when do I actually want to be on the goggles? Because I'd never crossed the Rockies at night on night vision goggles. I'd never flown across the state of Nevada on night vision goggles, which is just, there's nothing out there. It's pitch black. And so I had to really factor in safety there, because I figured if I take off at midnight, where am I going to be at, 6 hours later, that kind of thing. If I took off at midnight, I knew the entire state of Nevada and most of Utah would be covered at night. And keep in mind, as I'm going east, we're losing daylight. In other words, Dodge City, where I landed, is 2 hours ahead of where I am in Minden. So I'm losing daylight going east. So I just figured a 2 a.m. takeoff would be probably a good time. And so we left the house at midnight, and with the intent of taking off at 2 in the morning. We didn't get off till 3:09 in the morning local. So it just, no matter how prepared I am, it seems like it just still takes forever to get things in the cockpit and get things ready. It's just it's a lot of work. There's a lot of equipment that has to go into the cockpit, and everything has to be just right. Otherwise, if one thing's missing, then the flight either gets unsafe, or you just can't continue for whatever reason. Because anyway, so we got everything ready. This time we got everything ready in the hangar that was well lit. Usually we tow the glider out, and it's pitch black. It was, I think, probably 2:30 in the morning when we pulled the glider out. So this time I had my wife was there, luckily, and then two other friends, and my official observer, he was there. So I had support of three other people that could help hook up the glider and tow it out with the car. this is the first time we've done this, and it actually worked out better because usually if we're getting ready out on the runway, it's pitch black and there's stuff floating around, laying on the ground, and so it turns into a mess. And combine that with the winds, it just gets to be really a challenging thing. So Bruce and I got in the cockpit, got everything ready, and then they hooked us up and towed us out at 2:30 in the morning. And then the winds are relatively calm when we're getting towed out. And as you know, with wave, you just never know what to expect with the winds. So we just back taxied down the runway. The intent was to take off with the night vision goggles, obviously, on a dark runway, on runway 16. And when we back taxied down the runway, we finally got to the departure end of the runway, or the takeoff point. And as we were unhooking all the tow out gear, the wind switch turned on, and it just started howling, And I think the winds when we took off on runway 16. The winds were like 230 at 18 gusts into 32 or 34. I mean, just a nasty crosswind. So it turned into a challenge, just getting the canopy closed and everything else, and getting ready. So. Anyway, takeoff was in very rough rotor conditions at 3:09 in the morning, and then followed by a climb up to roughly 11,000 feet. The wave was really unusual, and I think it's because we had more of a westerly than a southwesterly flow, and I think it threw the wave off, and so the climb was slower than I expected. We ended up, like I said, in pretty rough rotor. I shut the engine down, and then the flight, I had declared a goal, and that was Garden City, was the declared goal, which we actually ended up making. And so that declared goal distance was 1,661 kilometers. And so Garden City is just west of Dodge City, where we landed. So takeoff, pretty sporty. Got back up into the wave, fairly soft conditions, went through the start gate, and then did a probably 1.5 meter, 3 knot climb on average. And just as you can see, working back and forth, trying to figure out the wave. It really wasn't optimal in the Carson Valley. Usually it's a very, very quick climb up into the flight level region. And then you can see the track south. And the reason for that track south is because I was aiming for Mount Grant there, which is to the east there by Walker Lake. What I ended up doing was tracking south because I wanted a direct tailwind to the wave that was being generated by Mount Grant, and I'll show that to you. And that's just west of the Hilton Ranch. And so I'll show you this. So my track was Minden, and then I worked essentially very soft wave, and then the goal was to get to this big wave area, which is Mount Grant. And so that was part of the flight plan. As I went through 16,000 feet, I picked up my IFR clearance with Oakland Center. They gave me a block up to, I think, 28,000 feet or something. And as you can see on the trace there, we went south a bit first, picked up a direct tailwind, and got into the wave generated by Mount Grant there at Walker Lake. And that was a very critical area. I knew I had to kind of stop and be patient with and get a big climb, because I was crossing in a very, very dark area of mountains, and I wanted to be high. We had a lot of so the Mount Grant wave was okay, and I ended up getting up to it says 8,300 meters. So I knew I needed to be high there to make a big jump over to the Toyabe range, which is that next range right there. So So now we're kind of in central Nevada, had a lot of icing inside of the cockpit, and navigation was a little unusual because of the winds. You know, the LX screen was flopping around a lot because you'd go from 160 knot ground speed to a 5 knot ground speed, and things were a little strange with the LX. So it was a little disorienting, but the night vision goggles kept the wings level, and we were able to navigate towards that Toyabe wave right there that you see, and that was good enough to keep us high. And then the next point that I had focused, and all these points where you see us stopping, these are actually points that I have in my IFR flight plan, and the reason why I selected those was because of SkySight. And just want to thank you, Matthew Scudder, for putting out a great product. So we did a climb up the Toyabe range and then made a long jump over to Ely. Now, so we ended up east of Ely, and then there's a peak out just southeast of Ely. It's called Wheeler Peak. So I think it's about a 4,000 plus meter peak, and that SkySight was showing some pretty good wave in that area also. And I'll show you where that is. So we had, let's see, let me find Ely. So I basically went from, this was the Toyabe lift, and then I had kind of a long jump out here, and we have the Wheeler Peak or Ely wave right there. So I knew I had a big jump from here to here. And what we ended up doing was
And how far is it? What is a big jump? How far?
let me take a look.
Just to get a rough idea.
Yeah, let's say 150, well, it's 300 kilometers.
Okay, that's quite a bit.
So 300 kilometer, and keep in mind, I'm trying to stay up into the flight levels. You don't want to get low. Out there, there's not many options for landing out there in the middle of Nevada, and it was still very dark. We're still in the goggles at the
So
time.
how did the goggles perform in these conditions? And was it like a surprise to you because you are used to flying in, as you said, like conditions where there's some lights on the ground maybe and so on. In the desert, completely dark.
Yeah, we had zero moonlight at all. So
Oh,
that
so it
made
was
things.
totally darkness.
It was it was pitch black outside. I mean, pitch black. And then the other issue we had was the icing. I had the clear vision panels, but I think the seal was not properly in place for between the clear vision panel and the canopy, and so I think some of our moisture had gotten in between the clear vision panel and the canopy, and it stayed there for most of the day, and it just got completely iced up. So that ended up being very, first of all, very claustrophobic and very disorienting. In the backseat, it was really bad, So we're kind of flying on instruments here because of visibility. I mean, the night vision goggles, I was able to look through clear areas of the canopy and still see the mountains and see where I was. But navigation these first 3 hours was really it was pretty wild. And then, that adds to fatigue because you're just you're really concentrating hard to keep everything straight, and then at the same time I'm talking to ATC. I'm trying to keep the glider up and trying to keep ourselves alive up there at 26,000 feet. So
I guess the cold didn't help as well, right?
Oh, that was a cold one. It was it was interesting. SkySight, the day before I looked at SkySight, and moisture is a huge issue we have to deal with, especially going east, because usually you're going to have too much moisture across the Rockies that allow you to do a flight like this. And this was a relatively clear flight with the exception of high level moisture that was probably 30,000 feet or so. And so that high level cloud cover kept everything very, very cold until we finally got into like eastern Utah, where the sun finally got into the cockpit and we finally warmed up. But
What
that
temperature
was,
you had in the cockpit during the night?
I don't know. A lot of people ask, I need to put a thermometer in there. I'm just too busy.
Yeah, of course, it's
I know
interesting.
it's on the LX on one of the pages. I need to pull it up, and I have in the past, and I honestly don't know. I'll try to figure that out here in the future. I'm just too busy to. I don't even want to look at the number.
Okay.
It just makes things worse.
It was freezing cold. Let's tell it like that.
Yeah. So yeah, you just you mentally overcome it, and it's not going to the cold's not going to kill me, so you keep pressing on. But um, so the climb over, once I got towards Ely, now we're talking to Salt Lake Center. They're very cooperative and giving me great blocks of altitude. And typically with these flights, I'll ask for like a 4,000-foot block of altitude. We'll write that down, and then if I need to deviate, you can see all these deviations. So on the map, and all these deviations were essentially kind of going around the areas where SkySight was showing strong sync. Keep in mind, and I think our average tailwind component up at the flight levels was probably 60 knots, 65 knots. And we're running pretty much with a direct tailwind along this route, which was really, really nice. It helped with the ground speed and help move things along. So as we got to this area out here, as you can see, that was in Utah, and that was another critical area in the center of the map right there. That was in an area called Wayne's Wonderland. It's just northeast of Parowan. And so SkySight was showing that also as I'll show you where that is on the SkySight map. And so I think that's this area right here. And so you can see the jump from the jump we made from essentially Ely out to this Wayne's Wonderland area northeast of Parowan. That was another crucial area. And so there were probably throughout the flight, probably 9 or 10 very critical points that SkySight was showing that I needed to get big climbs in. And they actually worked out very well. So we stopped in this Wayne's Wonderland area just northeast of Parowan, got a big climb, and then or west of Wayne's Wonderland actually, and then we worked our way to the east. And now we're in central Utah, and we're let me see where we're at here. So yeah, we're in this beautiful area of the United States, and so we ended up over Capitol Reef National Park, which you can see there, and some of those pictures are posted on WeGlide. And so we worked, as you can see, we made a northerly track, and that was due to SkySight showing some strength of wave. And these are kind of strategic climbs in order to place ourselves high enough to get to this area called Monticello, which is where the picture was taken to the east there. So we ended up crossing over just south of Moab, just incredible scenery, just spectacular. Now the goggles are obviously
what time was it now? It was already, the sunrise was already.
Yeah, so we took the goggles off near Ely.
Okay.
That's when the night goggles came off, just on the east end of the Nevada border. So the NVGs came off. I stowed those. Now we're just visually looking, and it was interesting. It was Bruce he was sitting in the back seat. I couldn't really see out much, but he goes, "Hey, what are these big lights lined up?" And we're still on the goggles. This is at like 4 in the morning. And anyway, Starlink had like 24 satellites that were flying straight overhead in a straight line, straight above the glider. It was magical, pretty cool. So he'd never seen that, and I pointed that out to him. That was Starlink. So anyway, so let's get back to basically this area over south of Moab and southeast of Moab. So the area where the glider is right now, that is an area called Monticello. Now we're actually in Colorado now. I'm talking to Denver Center. And so we knew it was I knew it was going to be a long glide to this Monticello. We'll just call it Monticello wave, but I'll pull it up on the Sky site and I'll show you kind of what we're dealing with. And so you can see right here, we went from essentially this wave, and you can see this wave right here in Monticello. And so that was roughly, let's just move that up to 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. So this is currently 19,000 feet. So let's just say 5,000 meters. And you can see this wave right here. It's a very soft area in this area of western Colorado and eastern Utah.
Yeah,
And
that's not much of a wave to rely the your flight on.
And
So you can
that's the
see,
only one. You have to get it.
if this wave didn't work out, it was not going to work. We would end up landing in Durango, because right
But
here
there's a nice
we're
railway station. That's okay.
yeah, there you go. Take the train, right?
Yeah.
So so we took this wave right here and worked our way around kind of the blue areas of sync. And once again, SkySight was unreal. This was the most important part of the entire flight, this Monticello area. And I talked to Walt Rogers and Jim Lee and several other people. We said, this is either going to make or break the flight right here, this little section. So I had focused on this, and I was looking at this for days on SkySight before the flight, because I realized that is the only thing that is going to get me to the Rockies, because I had to be high, because these Rockies are, 4,500 meters. So, and so if I zoom out, you can see some wave in the Rockies, and there was some wave right here too. And that's just east of this mountain called Mount Peel, east of Moab. The problem with this, the reason why I chose not to go to this, is because if I went east from here, this is the widest range of the Rockies, and it's super high mountains, and it's very wide. And I would have to be super high, and if something didn't work it out in here, I would be in big trouble down in these 4,000 meter peaks. So I decided to kind of take the southern route, and so from the Monticello area. So I chose this area, Monticello, because this would drag me into the Durango area, which has a suitable airport for landing. And also it's at the south end of the Rockies. So there are a lot of fallout points over here that I could fall out on if the wave didn't work out. And you can see even here, it's not that really that strong in the Rockies. So if we go back to this Monticello point, which is, I think, the most critical part of the flight, I ended up getting there, and I don't know what altitude, Benny. What are we showing here? What altitude?
You're in flight level 190. So that's
Okay.
5,700 meters.
Okay, so let's go down to where the pictures were taken.
Yeah.
And end up dropping down a little further. So I knew when I got there, based off SkySight, there was no rotor, there was no visual marker, no lenticular or anything. When I got there, I knew I would end up having to be very, very patient and have to accept a very slow climb. And that's exactly what happened. So that's still, that's still back west, I think.
Was there any experience of wave flying in this area, or was it
Never?
really
So I had made a flight in the Duodiscus, and I landed north of Monticello, northeast, in the Gunnison, Colorado area. I didn't make it across the Rockies. So I get to this Monticello area, and I called Denver Center, and I said, I might be here for 2 hours. Just keep us up to date. So I actually started in probably a half-meter lift, maybe 1 or 2 knots, and just was extremely, extremely patient with the climb. I had to be patient, otherwise, if I would have been impatient left, I would have ended up landing in Durango without a doubt. So I accepted this extremely slow climb, and I had Starlink, obviously. Most people know that, and I was doing live feeds. So what I did is I booted up the Starlink, and I got that thing going, and I refreshed the SkySight weather and updated everything. and was able to find just this real small area lift, and ended up, as you can see, zigzagging and doing these figure eights in. And finally, it picked up to where I got maybe 2 knots, and then eventually this very, very small core, almost something you'd have to almost thermal in. It ended up being like 3 knots or 1.5 meters lift. And so next thing you know, we're up at 22,000 feet, and then 24, and then I asked for a clearance up to 28,000 feet, and I was denied. I was not allowed to go to 28. So I had to stop at 26,000 feet, which was plenty to make my run out east towards Durango as you move that glider further east. You can see we ended up out towards kind of the Durango area and to that next area of lift, and I'll show you where that is. And that's so that area where the glider is this area right here, right now. As you can see right there, let me move the clock up. And one thing it was, so it's right here. So one thing that was really interesting is that although the progress leaving Minden I thought was going to be really slow, I was just completely blown away is how fast we got to Colorado. I mean, I'm going, people are still having breakfast down there on the ground. It's amazing. And with the luxury of the night vision goggles, I knew that we can, if we needed to park in this wave for hours, I was willing to do that because I wanted to get across the Rockies. And I knew that like running east of the Rockies with night vision goggles wouldn't be an issue because it was completely flat. There aren't any mountains anymore. So, I was
What's
very
the wind speeds? How fast was the wind?
I think it was let's just say 50 to 60 knots, in the flight level region.
Okay.
And then up to 60, I think maybe 65 knots. So nothing super, I mean, for thermals, yeah, it's strong, but for wave standards, that's not too strong. So that picture right there is looking up north from Durango. Durango is below on the bottom of the screen, and then that's looking. So if you look up north, you can see that how wide the Rockies are, and that's why I chose not to cross in that area because there's nothing but big mountains, and those are big mountains. And so that would have been a lot harder and very, in my view, pretty unsafe and too risky to chance. So I chose a southern route down along Durango because I had other options to the south to fall off on. As you can see on the map there's if you back it up a little bit back to Durango, you can see to the south there's very little there's not too much high terrain. I'm still pretty high, but so as you can, one of those pictures shows, so we actually had a little lenticular show up right here, and the Denver air traffic control is very, very busy in this region of Colorado because the holiday season, a lot of private jets and airliners and everything else that were up there. But they were very, very cooperative and very patient with any deviations that I was asking for. And what we decided to do was, based off SkySight, work our way up towards the northeast, kind of. And the goal here from Durango was to get across these Rockies, and SkySight once again was showing it fairly weak. And let me fast forward this, so you can see our goal was to get to this stuff. This was the goal. And once I knew we got to this wave here, which is off the Sangre de Cristos, that I had it made. Garden City at least would have been, within glide. So we ended up kind of working our way up kind of in this direction. And then you can see this is a big valley to cross. And the reason why you see that northeasterly track on the map, we went up kind of in this direction. And then I tried to narrow the gap between this and this wave because I figured there would be no lift here. And these are big mountains too. So I kind of worked my way to the northeast and then ended up crossing where this valley's fairly narrow and then climbed up in the wave here. And then that was it for the wave, as you can see.
So the Durango wave itself was also super weak, right? So the second
Durango.
very weak
So
time in a row.
It was
right.
even
So
weaker than the other one, huh?
yeah, the Durango, the Monticello wave was extremely weak. The Durango wave, we'll call it the Durango wave, was super very weak too. And so those areas, it's amazing because seeing that with SkySight, I knew that I just had to be extremely patient. And even, I mean, I even told Bruce, I said, that Monticello wave, I said, I'll sit here, or in the Durango wave, I'll sit here for 6 hours if that's what it takes, to get up high. Because I knew once we got to the Rockies on the east side, that we would be, have the luxury of a very strong climb off the Sangre de Cristo range. So as you can see right there, Benny, where the glider is, those were all relatively weak climbs and kind of a slow progress. But I just, as we say in the US, I just tiptoed my way. Was very, very careful crossing those Rockies so that I was high enough to make that jump across exactly from there to the Sangre de Cristo wave. So it's funny, about an hour before I was here, I had the Starlink up and I ended up getting a call. My phone is ringing, and it showed Salt Lake Center. Salt Lake Center was calling me. And I went, oh crap, I made a mistake. I pissed them off or something. So I actually answered the phone, and he goes, yeah, this is John with Salt Lake Center. And I go, oh. He goes, I noticed you called yesterday before you took off, and you were wondering about the military airspace near Ely, Nevada. I said, well, we just passed that airspace about 3 hours ago. We're at 24,000 feet now. And he goes, okay, well, great. And good luck on your flight. And that was that. So it's neat with the technology now to be able to take calls, do live feeds, get updated SkySight weather. You're really bringing people into the cockpit, and that's one of the goals with this type of flying, is to bring not only soaring pilots but non-aviators, and just people are just blown away with these posts on Instagram with these live feeds, going, here I'm at 26,000 feet and going up 1,000 feet a minute, or it's pretty cool. So it's interesting with that whole thing, because where the glider is now, I was being controlled by a Denver center controller who actually said, hey, you're that guy that's on social media, that glider guy that does all these neat flights in the wave. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, just let me know what you need, and I'm here to help you, So it's
That's
really neat to
great.
see. It's incredible to get the
Yeah.
support with social media. People are seeing this stuff, and you're even bringing air traffic controllers into the cockpit with you, and they're so excited to see this stuff happen. Then I got a few calls from these airliner guys going, hey, where did this guy, asking ATC, do you mind if I ask a question? Yeah, where did this guy start off from? And we started off in the Reno area, and how high is he? He's at 28,000 feet, and they're just going, holy shit, this is crazy. It's pretty cool. So it turned this whole thing into it's a whole different thing. And I wish people like, Joachim Kuettner could see this now. They'd be fascinated and excited for the whole thing, because that was their original idea. And, so I'm kind of fulfilling the dream of these old timers, so to speak. But so it's funny when the Denver controller so Benny, when I was here, at this point of the flight, I was approaching the Sangre de Cristos. There was a high lenticular, and then an airliner had reported to ATC strong up and down drafts of mountain wave at 41,000 feet. So you can imagine, if I had the ability to climb up into the upper 30s or something from this point, how much further I could have gone, with another extra 3,000 meters, or let's say 10,000 feet, right?
Sure.
So this very supportive Denver center controller was, hey, what can I do for you? I said, hey, is there any chance I can climb up in the RVSM airspace? I was hoping to maybe get up to 30,000 feet, which would have taken a minute or two, from 28. And he said, well, let me check with my supervisor. And he goes, well, unable. And so anyway, 28,000 feet was my limit to that whole thing. And just remind me later to talk about this RVSM stuff and with future goals. But I'll explain what might be happening here. But so I get to this wave off the Sangre de Cristos, and I actually once I left the Rockies, I knew I had Garden City made. I mean, I was still well over 500 kilometers out, and I go, we got this in the bag. And I was pretty much already celebrating because I knew that the hardest part was going to be to get across those Rockies, and that hard part of the flight was accomplished. So once I left the Rockies at, I don't know, what was it, 26,000 feet or whatever, I knew I had Garden City made. That was my goal, and that was the goal of the flight. So I left the Sangre de Cristo wave at 28,000 feet was my max allowable altitude. And then you can see I did stop and turn into the wind a couple times when I picked up some harmonics leaving the right there. You can see there I'd made some turns into the wind just to pick up a few extra 1,000 feet. And so it was, I don't know, it was 500 kilometer or almost a 500 kilometer final glide. It's like a diamond distance final glide. 8,000
But
feet.
you lose more than 1,000 meters, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, that's right.
And there was no further waves out of, so more secondary, third waves, fourth.
Yeah, there was a secondary, tertiary wave, but was it I mean they were fairly slow climbs. I guess I could have maybe stopped and climbed a little longer, but keep in mind my limit was 28,000 feet. So by the time I left that tertiary and stuff, it just it probably wasn't worthwhile climbing any. I'm not sure, but I don't think it would have been too advantageous.
But still, what's fascinating to see here is from the barogram, I think this is about the last place where there is actually some updraft available, even if it's of course not strong anymore. But this seems to be 200 kilometers out from the last ridge of the Rocky Mountains, and there is still resonance there.
Yeah, and what's amazing is and there's always been kind of that mystery of how far do these harmonics go east, right? And I do remember I was flying from like San Francisco back to Memphis on the 777, and I knew we would have wave on the east side of the Rockies, and it was 1 a.m. or something like that. But I mean, we were well east of the Rockies, probably 300 kilometers east of the Rockies, and we were at 35,000 feet or something, and I mean, the autopilot's obviously on, nose pushes over, throttle go all the way back. And then we got to the down part and, the nose pitches up and throttles go shoving forward. And so we had very, very strong wave at that time, way east of the Rockies. So there is some kind of question or mystery or answers that we need to get to how far east do these harmonics go. And I don't know if anyone can.
What did SkySight say about the harmonics towards the east?
Well, let's take a look. So if we go back to Sky, so Benny and Matthias, I regularly, even if I'm not flying, I will study all this stuff east of. So essentially, you can see I made the run from here. We made the run from here out towards. There's Dodge City right here. You can see the name Dodge City. So this whole segment, as you can see, really shows nothing. Few harmonics right here. And that's what we ended up, SkySight was spot on because that's what we ended up using. And that was pretty optimal. And the wind direction was pretty much a direct tailwind. So that's one thing I had to factor in also because, if I have a quartering tailwind or a direct tailwind, it's a big difference, with the final glide when you have a 60 knots of wind. So I had an absolute direct tailwind going all the way to Garden City. So it was just like absolutely perfectly executed. And, it just was so ideal. So you can see this run here in between that wave, and you essentially see nothing anymore, right? So there's really nothing going on. And I've never seen that. To this day, I've never really seen a SkySight show anything significantly east of I've never really seen any significant wave east of what we're showing right there, and like I said earlier, if we could Trump could build a mountain in the middle of Kansas, 5,000 feet up and about 20 kilometers long,
Maybe you
get me.
ask him because he will do it.
That's right. Even if it's yeah, just using whatever you want. But if we had a mountain in the middle of Kansas, then that could have been another climb up to at least 28,000 feet, and then that would have been east of the Mississippi River, and probably well over half the country. And I think beyond Klaus Ullmann's straight out record. So so um, so Benny, right where you had the glider, we were still in the flight levels. So we were talking to ATC. I had still was on an IFR clearance, and way back over the Rockies, that already asked for direct to Garden City from Denver Center, and they said you're clear direct Garden City. Um, so it was pretty much a straight shot. And what happened, because earlier I said that I don't have a letter of agreement with Kansas City Center, I was starting to wonder, like, uh-oh, we're gonna spill into Kansas City's airspace in the flight level region, right? Which requires an IFR flight plan. So I had to pull up the height chart to see where Kansas City's airspace took place, and I said this could be an issue. And so we were kind of talking about what to do about it. And I said, well, I'm just going to let Denver Center handle this. And sure enough, I mean, like 5 minutes later, Denver Center says, hey, I went ahead and gave Kansas City a heads up that you're coming their way. They're ready for you. And, you know, and next thing you know, they switched me up to Kansas City Center, and Kansas City gave me, clearance. I think their block altitude they gave me was like, 8,000 to flight level 210 or 230 or something, just a massive block. And so you can tell they were kind of, really excited to see this thing happen. And I did tell them, I said, hey, keep in mind, my IFR clearance was to, the destination was Garden City, right? And I said, hey, I'd like to continue beyond that and go to Dodge City if I still have enough altitude to do so. But I said I will need to overfly Garden City, because remember I had that as a declared goal. So that I had to get over my finish line. So I had kind of explained that to him. And she said, yeah, descend and maintain pilot's discretion to 8,000 feet. And I was still over 200 kilometers out. And I said, well, let me just, you mind if I stay up here? And she goes, you're cleared 8,000 to flight level 230. Basically the sky is yours. So as you can see there, I did overfly the Garden City Airport, went through the finish gate. So I did complete that declared goal of 1,661 kilometers. Pretty cool. Went through that finish gate, I don't know, 11,000 feet or whatever. And then had glide with the Dodge City, made it with like basically essentially 1,000 meters AGL. The winds had really started dying off down low here, so I didn't really have a massive tailwind component. Continued past Dodge City a little bit, and then swung around and came in and landed. And there was actually a guy that had driven from Kansas City with his car and brought a tail dolly, an Arcus tail dolly, and a wing runner for me, and was there when we landed. And anyway, we landed after sunset. You can see just a stunning sunset there, and not too much of an issue with the landing with the crosswinds. We did have a little bit of a crosswind, but nothing big. The runway is about 30 meters wide, so probably could have landed perpendicular on the runway there, with strong wind.
Did you need the goggles for landing, or was it still bright enough?
No. And then that's another thing, Benny. I landing in the back seat's really, really difficult. The ice finally started melting off once we got over in the Dodge City area. And so everything was dripping off the canopies onto us. And so I did have the clear visibility from the back seat with with everything being cleared up on the canopy. But I didn't want to land with the goggles. I just, they weren't needed at all for the landing, but half an hour later it would have been. So it just worked out really, really well. And so one interesting story here is regarding the crew, because people go, how do you get this glider back, right? And
yeah,
that would be the final question.
So yeah, so I got on the on this WeChat thing for the Minden Soaring Club and threw you know threw the idea out and said, does anyone want to come and pick me up in in Garden City, Kansas, if we make it that far? And no one was answering, I mean, just nothing.
What a
And so,
surprise. What a big surprise.
yeah, so I wasn't expecting much. And then my phone rings and I get a call from Gary Ittner, who happens to be a 17-time national U.S. champion. And Gary goes, hey, I've got nothing going on. I'd love to take your trailer back east and come pick you up. And I go, are you serious? He goes, absolutely. So I said, okay, I would be an honor to have you do that, Gary. Thank you so much. And so knowing that Gary was doing that, he's driven a trailer across the country, hundreds of times probably over the years. And so I didn't have any concern with him getting the trailer there safely. But I said, here's an idea. I said, since Garden City is so far away, let's go ahead and have you drive the day before we even take off. So I think our flight was on a Friday. So I met him Wednesday afternoon with the trailer and the truck, handed everything to him. Here are the keys. And he left actually Thursday morning at like 6 a.m. and drove to Central Colorado, and we hadn't even taken off yet. So he's already 1,200 kilometers away or whatever with the glider trailer.
And that's sorry, Gary, we didn't take off. Come back, please.
I know. I felt so bad because I go, if we land in Ely or 100 kilometers away, this is going to be a complete embarrassment. He's going to be driving west for another 1,100 kilometers with an empty trailer coming back to Minden. Come pick us up. We're only 100 kilometers from Minden Airport. So anyway, he ends up. Yeah, he drove out to Central Colorado on day one before we'd even taken off, and then we took off on Friday at 3 a.m. essentially. And I think at 6 a.m. he started driving east. And the funny thing is, when we got to this Monticello area and it was very weak, I called another partner in the glider, Steve Sliwa, who I was talking to and he was communicating with Gary Ittner. And I said, tell Gary Ittner to stop driving, stop the car. We might not end up east of the Rockies. And so he called Gary Ittner and said, all right, hold your position. They might not end up over the Rockies. And come to find out, Larry, or later on, Gary had told me that he just kept driving east anyway. So the probably the most interesting part of the story is we land. I got out of the glider. I called Gary Ittner and I go, where are you? He goes, I'm 5 minutes out from the airport.
No, you're kidding.
I kid you not. I mean, it's not.
No,
he was up 5 minutes later with the trailer. It's amazing, So we
why
tried
are you not here? We are here since 5 minutes.
You are late.
What's going on? Yeah,
in Germany, we are on time. Du bist spät.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Ganz
spät. Anyway, it was
great.
It was so magical the way the whole thing ended up. And what we ended up doing, we tied the glider down, and it's interesting because Steve Leonard, who came from Kansas City, brought an Arcus tail dolly and a wing runner and everything. He had no idea that Gary was only 5 minutes out, so we had all our gear that we needed. But he was saying the day before at Dodge City, the winds were blowing like over 100 kilometers an hour, like 120 kilometers an hour. So very windy the day before. So they had some big winds, but we tied the glider down and went over to a restaurant and pounded some good beers and then had a steak and then woke up the next morning, very windy, probably, 50 kilometers and maybe on the surface, very, very cold. And we got the glider safely in the box and we actually drove straight home. We didn't even stop. We just 20 hours straight back.
Wow. No, so one way, yeah? No.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Nonstop. Yeah.
Okay.
No sleep.
So who drove, Gary or you or both?
No, we both drove. But Gary drove he drove almost to Denver, and then I drove kind of into the Rockies, the east side of the Rockies, and then Bruce drove. And so we kind of split it up. But I mean, you're so excited. You just, I probably went 3 or 4 days with zero sleep. It's just crazy. It's amazing what the mind and the body can do when you're excited about something, the adrenaline's amazing. So Anyway, that was that. We got the glider back and then started the holiday season, and no wave since then, but I'm ready to go again.
You're ready to go again.
Yeah.
I do have a question. You said about the weather. It was a very rare weather. What was it different of this weather to the other weather where you're doing the yo-yos for the 3000 Ks?
So the fact that we had this, it was basically the jet stream was basically, it was a straight line. Usually you get a huge dip in the jet stream. You get a very deep trough, right?
Okay.
On this day, it was zonal from the west coast of the United States all the way into
Yeah,
Kansas.
I
It was
understand.
basically a straight line of a jet stream, and that's essentially what I'm talking about when I say zonal flow. So it was just unbelievable. And when you see that, you have to keep an eye on that. And luckily, it really it stuck. It stayed the entire week and through the flight, and even like a day or two after the flight. The other big issue with going downwind is a straight line downwind is so much harder than a yo-yo flight because you're just covering so much different landmass, and typically you'll run into a lot of moisture in either the Utah mountains, the Wasatch Range, or the Rockies, and that's a no-go item for these kind of flights because you obviously want to stay out of the clouds. But this luckily the two things that were going in our favor were the zonal flow pattern, and also the fact that we had very little moisture in the flight level region that I was working in, and that ended up being very beneficial. Now, if we back this up 15 years, like before SkySight, okay, you'd ask me, would you rather have zero moisture, or would you rather have, would you rather have too much moisture or not enough moisture? And now with SkySight, obviously not enough. I would rather have zero moisture than to have any markers, because I don't necessarily need those visual cues anymore that I needed 15, 20 years ago in the Kestrel and the Duodiscus, and where I'm planning a downwind flight based off of these geographical mountain features. These should generate wave, and thinking back in the Duodiscus and Kestrel days, for all I know, I was climbing in one, in a half a meter lift, which I did a lot of times because I didn't have any visual markers, rotor clouds or lenticular. I was just basically flying off of what the landmass, was basically telling me with wave. And for all I know, I was climbing in 1 knot or a half a meter lift, and I had 5 kilometers off to my left or right wing. I could have had, 8 meters per second. Who knows? And that's the luxury now of having the SkySight, and the accuracy of it is that we can plan these big flights now with these type of forecasts that SkySight or whatever else is out there. Using that weather that's available on these really neat weather apps is phenomenal. And this really puts SkySight to the test, I must say, because these soft areas that were needed to make that crossing over the Rockies, that was exactly the areas that SkySight showed were working. And yeah, they coincided with the geographic areas. I probably would have ended up in those areas anyway had I not had SkySight. However, just being able to narrow down a lift area or lift point based off of what SkySight's showing me and be able to update with Starlink is just phenomenal, And that's what I think the difference now versus 15 years ago. That's the advantage we have. And I think SkySight and these weather apps are definitely probably the most advantageous thing that we have now. It's a new era for soaring, and I think people see that in the Alps. They see that everywhere. So
yeah, definitely it is. But another question, the other way around. At the day you flew, would it be possible to make a yo-yo about for 2000 or 3000 Ks as well?
oh yeah. So I got back, and it just got me more excited because this flight validated that this is possible. Okay, because this is the first time I was able to get as far as I went. So
Yeah,
now
of course. But
it's
just
just
to
so
understand the
exciting.
weather situation.
Yeah, so let's go further now. That's my next thing. It's like, well, how can we go further, and what other things can we do? And so I think in a previous podcast I talked about um, I talked about doing a like a yo-yo flight. So I do have and just a few days ago I mapped out a whole I think 3,100 kilometer flight, and which is very, very doable, and that would entail basically running from the north end of the Sierras all the way down to the south end, with a start gate up to the north, run to the south end of the Sierras, and then back up to the north, back to the south, and then essentially going from the south end of the Sierras, coming back up towards the Minden, and then going out towards like central or eastern Wyoming or Colorado, and that would end up being a 3,100 plus kilometer flight, which I think is very doable. And I think the best way to go about that is to utilize the Sierra wave at night, and maybe start at 8 like at 6 p.m. or something, do the yo-yo thing at night, with the night vision goggles in the wave, because I'm very familiar with the Sierra wave. And I also have some clearances with the military airspace in the south end of the Sierras to go up high. So I think basically a three turn point flight, with the turn points along the Sierra, the last one being on the south end of the Sierra, and then running northeast up towards like Casper, Wyoming, or in that area, and that would get me to roughly 3,100 kilometers, and that's very, very doable. And I don't think there's any that's probably easier, I think, than doing a 2,000 kilometer straight out flight, because you're not really having to cross the Rockies or anything like that. So
Yeah.
um,
As far as
yeah, go
as
ahead.
far as I understand, to prolong the flight to the east is just to get higher in the Colorado, in the Rockies. So that's the only way.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to go about it. So the guy from Denver Center that spoke to me on the radio, he followed up with me. He contacted me through Instagram and said he was the airspace and procedures manager for Denver Center, and he said, I understand that you'd like to get into RVSM airspace, essentially from flight level 290 up
Yeah.
to whatever. So I have a phone call, a discussion with him on Wednesday, and so he's gonna hopefully help me get that like a letter agreement, or extend my letter agreement that allows me to fly in RVSM airspace. So let's throw that out for as an example. So like on this flight, if I would have had I wouldn't do it with the current auction situation I have, go up much higher, but if I had the ability to go in RVSM airspace, then I would probably equip the glider with a pressure demand regulator, switch over to that, and then that could get me maybe up to 38, 40. I mean, that day was probably going to 40,000 feet without an issue. So if you add another 10,000 feet onto 28,000 feet, that's a significant glide with a 60 or 80 knot tailwind component. So how far does that get you, right? So that's definitely in the, I think, in the realm of possibility. I think a 2,000 kilometer flight's easily doable, especially with the ability to go up higher. Now, the other option that I'd studied for years now is strategically placing myself so that I can climb either on the east side, essentially on the east side of the Rockies, make a climb there at, let's say, 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., get up to flight level whatever, and then go downwind and end up east, and then glide into when thermals start.
Yeah, that would be my next question. But
So
is a
it's
wave
the wrong. This
is
is
it
the wrong
during
time
the
of year for
thermal
that.
season?
Yeah, right now, I mean, the air mass that I flew into Dodge City was totally stable air mass. There was nothing,
Yeah.
no convective stuff going on at all. So now you're narrowing your time frame in which that's possible, because your wave season, you have to combine wave season with thermals back east, right? So now you're going, okay, now we're limiting ourselves to probably, maybe April, May, and then possibly June. because I did do that big 3,000 kilometer flight in June, which was rare. But those 3 months, you would probably be limited to those 3 months, be able to utilize thermals. And I also looked at another possibility of using those thermals is running south along the wave, along the Sangre de Cristo waves, down to get down to the Albuquerque area, and then go downwind into the Texas area where the thermals would probably be much better, and then end up on a final glide to where you end up in, let's say, Kansas, Texas, or something. You end up down in the thermal region, at say 11 a.m. or 12, or at noon. And I think with that possibility, I mean, you can easily go another, let's say 600, 700 kilometers, because you're likely going to have a tailwind component going, in that direction anyway. So if you combine the ability to maybe go up in RVSM airspace, let's say you start your final glide at 38,000 feet, combine that with thermals, now you're in a whole different ballgame. And then there's a possibility I might have the use of a JS5 in the next year. So you combine a 70-to-1 glider ratio on top of that, or whatever the JS5 is, and the kind of the sky's the limit. So I think I think we're just kind of opening the doors here. I mean, this is a really good, I'd call it a test of what's possible. Now we're starting to kind of delve into some areas that let's really start stretching the imagination type thing, which I think is doable, and we have to think about human, endurance limits and things like that too, because that comes into play from a safety factor. So, and then also big triangles. I'd like to start looking at big triangles. I think are very doable also. In the wave in the Nevada, you wouldn't have to really go anywhere east of Ely for a 1,500-kilometer triangle. So I think that's possible. The first two legs of that would be super easy, obviously, and then that upwind leg of 600 kilometers.
Just one leg.
It's just one of three legs. That's it. That's easy.
Just one.
Making a 5-knot headwind for 10 hours, right? 5-knot ground speed for 10 hours into the wind. Who knows?
But the other way, on your flight, you have 12 hours and at 100 Ks tailwind. So it means you flew only 500 Ks because the other one was just the wind.
That's right. Oh, God, these winds. Another possibility with that big triangle is to do that in a situation where you have wave maybe in the evening. You do those first two legs at night, and then thermals start over the Great Basin, like in Ely, and then you come back on thermals. That's another possibility. It's probably a little more of a rare situation, but you have to, I think, open up your mind to everything that's possible. So.
It stays interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's the work, the part that's really not fun at all is the preparation. It's horrible, and part of me, part of my mind is going, I hope the weather falls apart so I can just not have to worry about this and go to bed and not have to stress out. Yeah, and but when it all works out like this flight, it's just just magical. On top of that, it's just really neat to share this whole thing with the live feeds and IGC files and things like that. So anyway, I wish they would allow night flight in Germany, because it would be fun to see guys doing this stuff at night in the Alps and beyond. But the straight out thing is pretty cool. I think I kind of looked, because my wife goes, hey, why don't you give the Germans some perspective of distance, because the US is so big, right? You do an 1,800-kilometer flight or something, and that's only half the US. But this flight, like you figured, I looked at it, I put a distance ring around Frankfurt, and it's like this flight would be equivalent like flying from Frankfurt to Athens or Frankfurt to Istanbul or Frankfurt to almost Moscow or to Portugal. So,
but no one likes to go to Moscow. So,
let's take that off the list.
Okay.
But obviously things are much more difficult in Europe, and unfortunately with ATC, and I know, I mean, just from flying out there with the big heavy machines, the airspace is congested. But we've seen some pretty remarkable flights, especially in the wave being done in along the Alps and out over the water and things. I mean, it's Baptiste, and it's awesome seeing these new things being done. I think it's if just a little bit of what I'm doing inspires Europeans to go out there and fly year round. I mean, hell, if the air's going up, use it. I don't care if it's cold or hot, use it. It's go have fun with it. Don't put the thing in the trailer and geez, there's wave all over the place. So anyway, it's fun. I think it's going to be a continued fun ride, and hopefully we'll get some more stories out of this and keep your late night soaring videos going.
We will invite you if you do the 1500K triangle flight, definitely.
And we will invite
that'll be
you.
a good one with the glider people, But the straight out stuff is interesting for the non-aviators because the non-pilots or even the power pilots, you go, what they don't understand the yo-yo thing. You can explain a straight out flight a lot easier than a triangle or a yo-yo.
Yeah,
That's right. And therefore, we will definitely invite you back when you send us a picture of crossing the Mississippi River in thermals after the glide from Colorado.
We're waiting for it.
In my big red suit, right? Dying from heat exhaustion now. So it's a whole different part of that. Anyway, well, thank you both for having me, and I will
thank you for your time, joining your interesting flight with us and our spectators. It was a pity that Bruce Campbell wasn't in the meeting. Maybe he can send a picture so that our spectators will have a picture of him. Who was the second one in this cockpit?
Yep. Yeah, Bruce, he, I mean, it takes a tough individual to sit in these things for that long and deal with those temperatures, and he's definitely tough for that. So it's pretty neat. It's great to share it's really neat to share the experience with someone. It's a lot of fun. So anyway,
Gordon, thank you so much. This was a beautiful interview, and you have answered pretty much all of the questions which I had written down beforehand already while narrating your story. So it was good to have the interview flow like that. Thank you very much, and have a great start of 2026.
All right. Frohe neues Jahr. Vielen Dank. Tschüss.
Yeah. Thank you also from my side, and always happy landings in 2026.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.